Welcome to another video in a DIY series. So I've had this green plastic vinyl mailbox since I bought my house. It's been leaning a bit, and for over a year I could not close it because the door no longer latched on it. It's time for a replacement. This idea does not come from a vacuum. I watched several YouTube videos, but the main influences on my design came from these three channels, so giving some credit and appreciation for the help and inspiration. I started by prepping the area around it for a little landscaping, digging down to the post's ground level and clearing approximately about a foot around the entire mailbox and post, probably 3 inches deep to get it near the road's level too. Started with my small garden tools, but then worked a little smarter than harder with the shovel. To get this plastic piece off, you have to unscrew the 4 screws securing it to a post, and then it just lifts right off. If you have one of these kinds of mailboxes, there's already a post in the ground. I was not looking forward to digging up a post or pouring new cement, and with nothing wrong, I just kept this post. But the USPS wants you to have certain standards with your mailboxes, and the post should be 41 to 45 inches high, and the box should be about 6 to 8 inches from the curb. I happen to have a 4x4 from an old fence post that had been replaced earlier this year. So I cut it to size with my circular saw. So this requires multiple cuts as you rotate the 4x4, and I have not gotten these perfectly square yet, and a few times I've tried these kinds of cuts. Ended up sanding a lot to even it out a bit. I debated on how to attach the two 4x4s together and settled on this bracket. I think if I did it over again, I would go with something different here. A dowel screw and wood glue. At the time, I thought this would be the quickest and simplest with a few screws. Cutting it ended up being the easy part. Getting them lined up together, these two 4x4s, was the hard part. But I got to use my Klein digital angle gauge for the first time to see if it was level. But I wasn't sure how accurate this is, so I still used my level with the gauge. And it took a couple adjustments and some shims to get the bracket and the 4x4s to approximate level, somewhere around 0.5 degrees on the Klein gauge, and what I thought was good enough for a mailbox. Checked with the level again to make sure. I got worried about this gap that the bracket made, so I filled it with caulking. Again, I would not do this bracket again. I would probably try a dowel screw and some wood glue. I was just too worried that I wouldn't get it tight, but next time joining two 4x4s together, that's what I'll do. For the landscaping, I added a little cedar fence and some cypress mulch to box in the post. More coming later. Next was attaching a mailbox holder. This particular one I picked up from Home Depot, but when I went to Lowe's another time, it was cheaper there. These fit the black architectural mailbox I got quite well. Attaching it to the 4x4 post was pretty straightforward, except I had to get the measurements right so the box would end up approximately 6 inches from the curb. I got these measurements adjusting the board in place with my 2-foot T-square, traced the lines of the 4x4 post, and transferred the measurements to the top side with a small speed square. 4 2.5-inch screws through the top of the holder and 4x4 were put in, and this might have been enough to hold up a mailbox for a while. However, I already had some 2x4 45-degree brackets cut from a previous project idea, and I decided to use one of them here and add some additional support. The architectural mailbox I got at Lowe's was the cheapest I could find that would work for this project. However, they do not come with any screws to attach it to a post unless you buy their post and mounting system. I didn't have any exterior screws, so I just put in a couple 3/4 inch that I had lying around, tapped them in, and that was good for day one. It was functional and it wasn't going anywhere. Day 2. It only took about probably a 12-hour period for a bird to make the first deposit on this new mailbox. But after a trip to Lowe's to pick up some small exterior screws, and I settled on 3/4 inch stainless steel, it was back to work. Next up was sanding this down, giving it a light sanding so that I could start staining it for color and protection. I thought I could do this with the mailbox still on there, but ended up just taking it off. My design for this mailbox would use cedar fencing, most similar to the design of At Home with M&H. The original plan included covering the front and back of the 4x4 post with cedar, and then using the vertical fence style small pickets on the sides. But to even it all out, I cut the fence pickets to box the entire post in. Then it was time to play with the length of the cedar pickets and how the numbers would go on. I liked the idea of spacing the numbers so that they would cover the entire post and hopefully make it more visible. To cut the cedar pickets, I grouped them to make it faster. My circular saws fence is 4.75 inches from the cut line. So my little trick is to measure a dashed line for each cut mark. Place my speed square there, and this helps to keep a straight line and make the cuts quicker. Here is where my design combines elements of the others, as I ended up not liking all the pickets the same length, but this curve was a little beyond my skill level. So I staggered the lengths to get the look. 12 inches, 10 inches, 8 inches, and the rest 6 inches. By this point I had a little helper, and using a scrap small picket as a spacer, we put them on one by one. Then came the stain for look and protection. Turned out a little darker than I thought, but I still kind of like it. Day 3 required a quick trip for another sample jar of stain and the final touches. It was time for the numbers. I was still planning on my spaced out numbers, but after some feedback,
I hate it like that.
We went with no gaps. Numbers were a bit of a pain though, especially the included nails. But we eventually got them lined up and hanging. Put on a small solar light to accent the numbers at night, and it was time to step back for a semi-final look. Just one nail to hold up the numbers here. Definitely wish I had planned the screws for the pickets so that the numbers covered them up, but you only notice that close up. From the front, I really like how pickets on both sides give it depth in 3 dimensions. Final touches to the landscaping, including setting the stones like steps to the mailbox, and using some of the extra rotted 4x4s that kind of look like driftwood to me. Added another solar spotlight to highlight the other side at night.
Until we're done.
Now, done. A few days later, planted some seeds in the pot. Thanks for watching. Until next time.